Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits, and it seems here in the United Kingdom that summer has finally arrived. And if you're the kind of person who's of a botanical bent, the only musical that can possibly fit the bill is Avenue Q Gardens. Well, I am excited for you to hear today's episode because we're going to be talking about one of the best shows. In fact, I think the best musical that was on at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe in 2024. It was our pick of the Fringe, but you might say, well, hang on, why has it taken you until May 2025 to bring the news of this wonderful show to our collective ears? It's a reasonable question, but the reason I held this interview back is because I hoped that this show would have a further life. And indeed it has, because it's coming to London in May, June and July 2025. Now, what is the name of this paragon of a show? Well, it is called Pop Off Michelangelo, which is an arresting title for a show which does so much. This is a very clever show which swept me off my feet when I saw it in Edinburgh last summer, because at one level it's frothy, poppy, light, camp and an excellent comedy. And yet it doesn't take too much to spot that underneath the froth and gloss is a really meaningful piece of theatre. This is art that wears its learning very lightly. And for me last year, it was a wonderful, layered, clever, funny, tuneful show. And it couldn't be more contemporary. So, who's it by, I think I hear you ask? Well, the person who wrote it is a man by the name of Dylan MarcAurele. And I'm going to spell that name for you because I hope that you'll want to go to his website and keep an eye out for him in the future. Dylan MarcAurele. Dylan MarcAurele. And now he is a writer and composer based in New York City and whose work has been performed worldwide, here in London of course and in Edinburgh, but in New York, Boston, Las Vegas and San Diego, to name just a few. He has a BA in music from Harvard University and is a member of the Theatre Now New York Writers Lab. And Pop Off Michelangelo is far from his first show. There's a show called The Real Housewives, there's a show called Tea with G, a show called Megan, and a show called Lewis Loves Clark. And Dylan can write book, music and lyrics on his own and with collaborators. But in his most recent show, which is Pop Off Michelangelo, he was the triple threat. He wrote the lyrics and the music and also the book, and I was impressed by all three. It picked up stars galore in Edinburgh, and it's in London at the Underbelly Boulevard, which is a Soho-based theatre, between the 17th of May and the 13th of July. And I would strongly suggest, if you get any chance, go and see it. But what is Pop Off Michelangelo about? Well, it's described as the high camp musical comedy that stole the Fringe. And it tells the story of best pals turned bitter rivals, Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. A bloodthirsty friar is on the hunt for homosexuals in Renaissance Italy at the exact moment when childhood friends Mike and Leo realise they both like boys. Terrified, they devise a foolproof plan to gain God's forgiveness. They simply need to become the greatest religious artists of all time. Can Michelangelo gaslight, gatekeep and girl boss his way to the Vatican? Will Leonardo shut up about his helicopter? With an electro-pop original score as infectious as the bubonic plague and a script that has not been remotely fact-checked, this brand new Renaissance adventure is both hilarious and unhinged. And, if I may add my own description to it, also deeply moving and speaks to us here in 2025 as strongly as the characters are speaking to their own era during the period of Renaissance Italy. Well, I've done quite enough talking to introduce this show. I really don't want to hold up your listening to the conversation I had with Dylan, who is as charming as he is intelligent, as he is creative. And that's what you'll get to hear in just a minute, the wonderful in-depth conversation I had with him in Edinburgh last year. But first, Dylan has kindly agreed that we can play a song from the score of this show, and I think this song helps set the tone, the feel and the style of this show. It's a fabulous piece of pop music, but it's so much more, and the lyrics are clever and possibly a little suggestive. What's not to like, as they say. So in just a minute you'll hear the conversation with Dylan MarcAurele, the writer of Pop Off Michelangelo. But first, let's hear a song called Renaissance Man, or perhaps Renaissance Man, depending on your cultural affinity.
I can paint a picture, carve a castle with my hand, read and speak in Latin, Greek, unique, I'm very in demand. Yeah, I can make it, shape it, engrave it like no one can. Let me be your. Look around, the feudal state is flopping here. That sound, the printing press is popping. Change has come, there ain't no sign of stopping. Europe's finally being fun, glad her gothic phase is done.
Art is back, like whoopee in the habit.
Fame is free, in Florence you can grab it.
But when you're here, it's not all fun and games, you see. It's people stabbing backs to get some cash from Daddy Medici.
Long before Lady Gaga wrote the fame, before Super Mario and Call Me By Your Name. For Italians in one place, but it's not RuPaul's best friend's race. I can paint a picture, carve a castle with my hand, read and speak in Latin, Greek, unique, I'm very in demand. Yeah, I can make it, shape it, engrave it like no one can. Let me be your Renaissance man.
It's sad for sure that we were all such rivals. When one guy wins, one Fusili downward spirals. And while we wish each other rot in hell, we have one thing in common:
we all hate Raphael. Long before the meatballs from your granny, House of Gucci, Tucci, Stanley. For Italians striking up the band, we may be here, but we're not family. I can paint a picture, carve a castle with my thumb, read and speak in Latin, Greek, forging frescoes till you come. Watch me make it, engrave it like no one can. Let me be your Renaissance man. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Let me be your Renaissance man. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Let me be your Renaissance man. Long before those little boys in Lucca, we all let loose like Nissa Duca. For Italians here today, and did we mention we're all?
I can paint a picture, build a villa with a view. I'll fill up a basilica, yeah, it's just what we do.
I can paint a picture, sculpt a city, make it cute. Unafraid of Portland Play-Doh, I'll be shredded on the loop. Yeah, I can make it, shape it, engrave it like no one can. Let me be your Renaissance man. Whoa, whoa. Let me be your Renaissance man. Whoa, whoa. Let me be your Renaissance man.
My name is Dylan MarcAurele, and I am the writer and composer and music director of Pop Off Michelangelo at the Gilded Balloon.
Now, Pop Off Michelangelo, let's put my cards straight on the table, was a fabulous show. I loved it. It's energy-packed, actually, is the first way I would describe it. And that was so refreshing and delightful. That this, it's a professional show through and through, professional actors, professional everything. Cleverly thought through, cleverly performed, beautifully written. So I'm rather delighted by this show, as you can probably tell. But Pop Off Michelangelo is also quite an arresting title. So before we get into the bread and butter of what the show's about, or how it came to be, perhaps you could give me, without any spoilers, how you might describe the show for anyone listening who had the misfortune not to see it, or perhaps better yet, not to have seen it yet.
Absolutely. So Pop Off Michelangelo is a story about two artists that are familiar historical figures, Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo Buonarroti, and they are imagined as brothers in this story, and it's their quest to, in order to gain God's forgiveness for being gay, become the most famous artist of all time. And it's a dance pop score with a lot of, fun power ballads and a lot of innuendo and puns and silly jokes along the way.
But do you mind if I suggest you're slightly underselling yourself?
Sure.
Because it is absolutely possible to take this show at that beautiful sort of high-level froth, almost like a throwaway. But it's so much more than that. It's got a beautiful level of depth. There's some acid in the observations. There's some beautiful satire on the state in which we currently live. And actually it touches on what unfortunately has been an eternal struggle about how does a minority survive in a repressive regime. In this case, Renaissance Italy in the 15th century, I think, where the Catholic Church holds sway, and so do the Medicis as a family. I mean, one of them's the Pope, so that's also going to help. But, it's power is tied up in the hands of the few. This may sound familiar to some listeners, and is not being necessarily used for what might be called the common good, the wider benefit, and particularly for certain minorities. So I have to say this, and I know you know this, but I thought the show was delicious because it was very cleverly riffing on very modern sensibilities and an ancient struggle. Almost, and I'm going to use the word disguise, but that's not what it is, but it's sort of, dressed as a Renaissance story. So people can... Sorry, I'm going to use the British pronunciation of Renaissance rather than
please.
Renaissance,
Yeah.
which is obviously how it's pronounced throughout.
Which I only learned at the beginning of rehearsals.
Did everyone come in saying Renaissance?
Yes,
I'm sorry. It's just
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's this side of the pond,
No. I love it.
Although they did marvellously, giving in the what to me it sounded like the American pronunciation throughout, because obviously that's as written. So
Yes.
I think we should say you're from New York.
Yes, I'm from New York. Yes.
So obviously, that is a really important part of the story, and I think what makes it so delicious, actually, there's so much more going on. So what was your intent? Do you mind me asking?
Yeah,
was it going to be
absolutely.
frothy? Was it going to be meaningful? When did it develop into the actually sophisticated piece that it is, pretending to be not sophisticated?
Oh, thank you. I went on a honeymoon with my now husband to
Congratulations.
Italy. Oh, thank you. To Italy, and we went to Florence and Rome and Venice, and it was...
You did the grand tour.
We did the grand tour in a week.
All right.
And
the petite tour.
yes. And we had the best tour guide when we saw the David, and she was telling us about Michelangelo and, the fact that he lived to be so old and probably never, had sex in his life, and, wrote all these beautiful letters. And in contrast to his artistic rival, Leonardo da Vinci, who was very free-spirited, was unabashed, he wore pink tights, they were polar opposites. And I was very moved by it, and I felt really bad for Michelangelo for all of his... He was extremely pious, extremely devout, and I basically started kind of mapping on my own, struggles and
Experiences.
Experiences, growing up raised Catholic, onto Michelangelo's story.
Can I just say, Catholic
Absolutely.
guilt can be spelt in both ways, because there's a lot of gold in the world, and a lot of it's in the Catholic Church.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I think I have been able to channel a lot of my frustrations about religion in general onto this Renaissance story, as you said. And then the more I started writing, the more I found myself able to channel some of my frustrations about just being an artist and being a writer. And I don't want to spoil too much, but a lot of the show is about nepotism and about networking and about trying to find a patron, because we look back on the Renaissance and we see all this amazing art, and we're so, we love it,
Dazzled
but
by it,
we're
yeah.
dazzled by it, and we don't realize that it's just because this one family, the Medicis, had all of this money and were able to do whatever they want with it. So it has this sort of very dark other side to it, this concentration of wealth, and they could, use it at their whim. And
Which is both... It is interesting, you're right, because this is possibly a discussion for another day, but what you have there is an opportunity for creativity, but you also have a way of controlling creativity.
Absolutely.
And it certainly takes all the power away from the creator.
Yes. And so you wind up having to grovel to the people that have money. And it's not as bad today as it was in, the Renaissance, but these structures still exist. And
yes.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask you to comment on this, but many people have observed that what's sometimes called late capitalism is a less free form of capitalism. It seems to be tightening the belt for other people. So I see exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
Now that's really interesting, and I think, if you don't mind me saying, I'd just like to bring out one extra point, which I think is so important for the understanding of the narrative of Pop Off Michelangelo, which is both Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo in the story wish to be loved by God, wish to be good Catholics. They are not rebelling against their regime,
correct,
but they find themselves in a regime which they sort of essentially buy into spiritually, that does not want them purely because of their sexuality.
Yep. So
they're outcasts, as well as being on the fringe of society, because, creatives and artists are often portrayed that way and forced to live in, sometimes geographically away from the hub. So I think that's really important. It's not a simple rebellion story. That it's not not the rebels against the regime. It's not Star Wars.
Nope.
This is much more interesting, actually.
Their goal is to prove to God that even though they are gay, they still are amazing Catholics and deserve all of His love. And
they are good people.
They're good people,
yeah.
and ultimately, and I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler. I don't think it is, but the story is about, are we able to let go of some of that desire for approval and that desire for external validation, whether it's from a parent or a God or whatever? Can we find that fulfillment spiritually within ourselves, which sounds so cheesy, but I do think there is.
But fundamental.
Absolutely.
I mean, cheesy is one word, and yes, it's because you're trying to express really quite deep things pithily for a conversation with musical talk. So thank you for that. I think that this show is so wonderful because of the depths which are there, and yet you've designed it to be so sort of delightfully frothy. I mean, and that's a wonderful thing. It's clever. The craft is there, the cleverness is there, and it's for an audience member to take as much or as little as they want. And I suspect there's going to be a lot of people who just went away going, that was great, I loved the songs, wasn't that delightful, as airy as a souffle. And there's going to be other people who walk away and say, that was a rich meal, I should be chewing on that for days and days and days. I fall into the second category. This has been a casserole, and I'm still working my way through the dumplings. So no, but seriously, but the frothiness and lightness gives it a touch which I think helps it transcend some of the ideas into... It's a delicious show. Did you always know that you wanted to pitch it at that level? And can I say also, I suspect by doing so, it also helps make those parallels between a slightly throwaway 21st century culture and the... It's odd, isn't it? We sort of think of the Renaissance as, despite being so impressive, there's always that sense of possible decadence in it. I'm doing a lot of talking, so forgive me. Pitch. We were talking about pitch.
Absolutely. I don't have a lot of experience writing very, very deep material. My pathway.
I beg to differ, but I know what you're saying.
You.
I think you mean
So
deep presenting.
Sure. Right. Prestige. I began as a composer only, and I still collaborate with a lot of really talented writers, and I learned so much from them. And during the pandemic, I began writing just for ha-has. Do we have that in British?
No, it's not a phrase I've ever heard before, but I absolutely... For laughs, I guess. Is it, just to see if you can. Yeah.
Absolutely.
For the crack, I believe, is the Irish phrase which has been adopted into English.
Wonderful, okay. I started writing little musical theater numbers, 60 seconds long, about the reality show called The Real Housewives.
Oh,
I don't know if you're familiar.
That has landed.
Okay. And I just was having so much fun, and I had a lot of time on my hands, so I was writing these songs, and they kind of took off online, and that was really my sort of self-taught foray into songwriting and lyric writing, and I guess comedy writing.
So completely self-taught.
But I think I've just been absorbing from my collaborators and just what I like and what I don't like. So and at the end of the day, I do often feel like I'm just sort of writing. I'm doing a sort of armpit noise gesture.
Oh, I thought you were playing the bagpipes. Sorry.
That must be another American thing. No, I feel like I'm making very silly jokes, but I guess what I what I noticed was that if you, when the Real Housewives have a problem, like they lost their ring in a bathroom or something like that, and they're crying their eyes out, like, by making the music extremely serious and emotional, and recognizing the true emotion behind this, like, this wealthy, woman, there's just, like, magic there. And so I realized that magic can be applied to almost anything if you put, either very serious music on something very light, or very light on something very serious. That clash is everything. And so anyway, that's a roundabout way of saying I only have really written, like, very pop culture-y, referential, frothy material.
Zeitgeisty.
Zeitgeisty,
really, yeah.
Absolutely. But this was my first attempt at applying it to something a little bit bigger. And yeah, I'm glad that it landed for you.
Now, once again, I think you hide your light under a bushel. I hope you won't mind me saying that you're a very modest man, and I think unnecessarily so, because it's interesting to hear what you're saying, that you only, in big speech marks, write frothy pop. But the show is full of references, very memey. There was a lot of very contemporary stuff, which I'm an old man, and I could tell people in the room were getting and I wasn't getting. And yet, I think you also have musical theatre in your blood, do you not? Because we got a Finishing the Hat reference, which there were a lot of ears suddenly perked up and went, ooh, Sondheim. that. And then, if I'm not mistaken, I think there's a very tiny riff upon Swing Your Razor High somewhere in the melody.
Oh, maybe unintentionally.
Oh, fine. Oh, well, no, funny enough, it's towards the end when actually it has a kind of relevant...
oh my gosh.
There's a certain relevance to an action, not in a violent way, but as in bringing an action to a situation.
I think I know what you're talking about. Is it during a transition?
Yes.
Yes, I actually think that I think this may be the Dies Irae. I might be saying that wrong. The, like, Gregorian chant that Sweeney is pulling from, was what I was referring. Yeah.
So you're using a similar source material.
Exactly.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting 1 second. It's not a copy anyway.
Oh, no. I'm so glad I knew what you were talking about. Yeah.
But it's interesting that you did. So yeah, there's definitely a musical reference there, which is really interesting. That actually goes back to a similar source, which actually takes it back further to the ancestry.
I don't even think I realized till you said that's what Sweeney is from. Dun, 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 dun,
that's the one.
Yeah.
But deliberate or not, you've got a lot of cultural references which are not just what might be called pop throwaway. There's the musical theatre, so lots of different people, I think, were getting lots of different flavours from the whole thing. And of course you even start with a kind of sort of narrative note about the recent album called Renaissance, being a 21st century product. And rather cheekily you say, but don't forget that wasn't the first. There was another one beforehand, and here we are. But this gives the lie to your slightly humble statement that you only write in a sort of poppy way. Clearly that is where you're most comfortable, but you pack it with more than ephemeral material. So I think you're a writer of great craft, and if nothing else, I'm hoping by the end of this conversation I can make you accept that.
Oh, thank you.
But these layers, the memes, for example, when you're writing, let's call it throwaway pop, to use your kind of a description of it, it's still got to serve the narrative, so it has a function which pop rarely has, beyond getting you to the story of the song. How do you apply your pop writing skills to a piece of narrative theatre? Actually, I think this is what this question is going to boil down to.
Sure. Well, the first step for me was writing an outline of the whole show. And that's the most important, because we need to know where we start and where we end, and kind of what the arc is.
Your narrative nexus points.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then once I've found what makes every part of that journey, funny or interesting or conflict driven,
dramatically purposeful, I suppose. Yeah.
Yes. Then the songs arise pretty clearly out of that. And then I'm basically just making lists. I'm making, like, lists, free association of anything that I can think of on that subject. So I have Google Docs full of just things in the art world that I think are funny, and half of them don't even make it into the show, because it we also only had an hour for Fringe, but hopefully the real thing will be longer. But yeah, I have long lists of just Italian pop culture things. I have long lists of things that are theater but about painting, things that are theater about Italy.
Hence, by the way, Finishing the Hat, which
exactly,
of course is straight out
exactly.
of the most painted art of the Sondheim musicals. Yes.
I couldn't not refer to it. I also only watched it right before I started writing because I was like, I know I need to.
Yeah.
And there's a beautiful recording. I think is it BBC that recorded the? Maybe it's not.
But there is a recording of it.
Of Mandy Patinkin and
Bernadette Peters?
Yes.
Yes.
The
original, in fact. Yeah.
The original. Yep.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yes, I remember it was shown on the BBC. I remember watching it.
I think that's how I watched it.
I think on a Christmas Day years ago.
Yes. Okay.
Goodness.
Yeah. So that recording is still floating around on YouTube.
There's an Into the Woods as well.
Oh, okay.
If you're looking to fill your Bernadette Peters shoes,
Yeah.
and who isn't?
Because I only know the James Corden version of that show, so I need to watch that. Yeah.
Others are available.
So I'm making lists and lists and lists, and you know, finding the game in each song. So like, if you tell me like two brothers are trying to act straight in a very oppressive school, I'm sold. I'm like, oh, that's fun. There's a million jokes that I can make out of that. And so just building and building and building, and then choosing the best little punchlines, and you know, making rhymes. You'll say I'm underselling myself, but it really is just like rhyming silly jokes. But yeah.
But anyone can write rhyming silly jokes. It's how you put them together to make them fly.
Sure.
So once again, you know, there's cement here in your bricks.
And then every now and then throwing one in that actually has nothing to do with, you know, there were a couple of rhymes that I had to replace because they didn't work in British accents. So I forget what it was originally, but I was having so much trouble thinking of an on-topic joke, and then I'll just say it. Pop off Michelangelo, pop off Leonardo. Their teachers beg for more. They've popped off like a Boeing's door. I don't know if that was as big a deal here in America, but I'm proud of that one, even though it has nothing to do with art or anything.
But it's a popular resonance.
Sorry.
Yeah, a popular resonance.
A popular resonance to these Boeing airplanes whose doors keep falling off. But yeah. Yeah, that's how it happens, yeah.
Now, the thing you've just mentioned about the accent is something that Musical Talk has mentioned 1,000 times. Because,
oh, really?
Well, you know, we listen to a lot of American music because so much musical theatre is American, and excellent it is too. But even Sondheim, you know, Sondheim rhymes a number of rhymes which don't work to a British ear, so we have to hear the performer, whether they be British or American or otherwise, doing an American accent to make them work.
Right.
And the example I always give is actually from Hair. In the song Manchester, England, England, I don't know if you know it, but there's a character called, what I would call Claude, who talks to God, and in the accent Claude and God, as it sounds to me, rhyme. But to me, Claude doesn't rhyme with God, and actually the pronunciation of Claude, obviously very highly British in the way I say it, is Claude, and Clod sounds like a lump of earth. So it does. There's a rhyme that basically sounds like he's saying, and I believe that God believes in clod.
Yep, which sounds so normal to me.
Does
but
it really? To me,
does.
But to be a clod is to be an idiot, unfortunately. So, but yeah, just a really good example.
No, there were so many of those, and there were also like references that our director Joe McNeese, who's British, who's English. I'm really trying to get better at saying the right.
British is a catch-all that will cover everything. You go.
Wonderful. He was just really great at telling me, I don't think this will land. This probably will. And the rhymes. And in fact, there are still a few that snuck in that he was like, oh no, please just keep it. Like
the line's too good to mess around with.
Apparently, crepe here is pronounced crepe. There's a lyric that's like a Frenchman to a crepe. That rhyme. Well, I won't spoil the rhyme, but
it's a great. That's almost like a patter song. That one. It's got lots of triple rhyme.
It
comedy
does. You know what
rhyme.
I'm talking about.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking
about. So nice.
And you'll be pleased to know that Cole Porter used to. We all know about the triple rhyme in a comedy song being a particular way of hitting. Cole Porter used to make a great play of that. So if you're in the same company as Cole Porter, you aren't doing too badly.
I wondered about him because I had this feeling when I was writing that song Drawn to You that I could just keep writing more and more and more of them because I was having so much fun. And I've heard that about Cole Porter, that he would have like 10 verses of the same song, and then some that don't even get released that he kept on writing.
Yeah, if you read the lyric books, you'll see. Yeah, you're absolutely. It's a catalogue of catalogue songs almost in some senses. Back to the crepe thing. That's really interesting because I think we would say crepe paper, but I think we would say crepe as in something you eat. Even
So
though it's
I
the
wonder
same
if that's
spelling.
why we allowed it. Yeah, because people know what it means. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yes. It's but it is interesting. And did anything there? Well. What does the British audience taught you then, if you don't mind me saying? Because it's interesting you're premiering it here in Edinburgh, and I'll ask about that in a minute. But, audiences are an interactive part of any theatrical experience, and they're very vocal for this show. They were the day I came.
Sure.
Quite rightly. Have you learnt things that you're surprised have flown, which you didn't think necessarily would? Anything that's dropped dead on its feet that you had to,
absolutely.
What have you had to change, or at least the thinking of changing?
So the biggest terror was a certain, maybe I shouldn't name it, a certain character who winds up being a bit pivotal in the 11 o'clock number, I found out is not nearly as famous here as she is in America. She's a certain actress.
Oh yes,
but she is a name. She's known, but it's not in the same way as she is in America. And so this was this was flagged by the director. I was told by almost none of the cast members, who are also much younger than me, really knew who she was. And then people just have been really nice about it. People have still been laughing and enjoying that reveal and that character. So maybe I shouldn't have picked an example of a person that I can't say.
No, I think that's fine, and I know what you mean. But can I say, I think it's covered. I didn't know who that person was.
Oh, really?
And I'm an old man. But I recognised it as being someone who was famous.
Sure.
Because that happens all over the world.
Sure.
I can't tell you many Italian stars, for example. We're all ultimately, we try to live in a global world culturally, but we do still live in sort of cultural ghettos naturally along geographic lines. But there was sort of also an explanatory moment later on. So without going into it,
yes.
I remembered then who this person was.
Good.
So the incident that is one of the things that makes this person famous is referenced, and I went, oh, it's them.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, yeah. I'm trying to think of there definitely are things. It's also, the bigger the audience, the more likely that one single person will find something funny, and then others will feel permission to find it funny.
It's funny you should say that. I do think that actually audiences in Britain particularly often need a license to laugh, and if you can get them early, then they're in. But if you miss the jumping on point, then actually they'll sit there in respectful silence.
Yes.
And they'll let you know at the end if they've enjoyed it, but it doesn't necessarily fly in the room. It was very vocal. But I think also, because it is so funny, you are a very funny writer.
Thank you.
And also the tone is made very clear at the beginning. That's the other thing. People need to often work out what the tone of a show is before they feel whether or not they can. If it's Strindberg, they're not going to jump in, well, unless it's a very unusual adaptation, with the guffaws. But this lays its cards on the table, I think, almost immediately, and it sort of basically says, are you in?
Yeah.
And of course, you've got to be.
And I don't mind spoiling the beginning, where essentially the voiceover describes the recent studio album by Beyonce called Renaissance, and then says, but before that Renaissance there was one other. I can tell, I think, almost immediately what kind of night it's going to be based on the audience's reaction to that.
Because it's quite the statement, isn't it? I mean, it actually packs a lot into one sentence. I have to say it, there's a question of, because it's so dumb.
It is so dumb. It's absolutely so dumb. And I wanted to see how long I could get away with describing this album, Beyonce, and then completely left her and abandoned it, saying, this is not about that story. This is not about that Renaissance. So if someone likes that, then they will like the show. So, yeah.
And yet you can also like the show without knowing that, because I'm going to tell you I'd never heard of the album because I'm an old man. Beyoncé doesn't mean much to me. She hasn't written that much musical theatre. So
that's true.
Yet. The time will come, I have no doubt. Yeah. And if not, there'll be a jukebox musical coming my way any day soon. But, but I realised, it said there was an album, so I know exactly what that means. And the statement still stands on its own 2 feet. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the tone in the show, then, if I may. I'm going to have to use the word irreverent, if you don't mind exploring this. And that is a polite term for being, well, almost scabrous. But, this I was talking about the acid earlier on. It's very on the nose. I think that is one of its charms. I'm going to say a word I wouldn't normally use on Musical Talk, but it sort of doesn't give a fuck.
Absolutely.
And it sort of doesn't care that it doesn't give a fuck. Pardon my language, everybody.
Yeah. I think I had a lot of very real feelings about the Catholic Church that I haven't necessarily seen fully on the table in musical theater. I think it's very easy, and I'm still probably a little bit guilty of this, for movies
Catholic guilty of this?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. For movies and musicals that deal with religion to come to a sort of like sweet conclusion about like, well, God is XYZ, and like the truth of Catholicism is that everyone's a good Catholic. And I sort of wondered, like, can we actually skewer this a little bit more, because there's a lot here that I still really don't like. And so what if the Pope is on the phone talking horribly misogynistically about the mothers whose babies he has to kiss, and he's vaping, and he's doing coke, and like
he's very 21st century, isn't he?
Very 21st century,
and decadent, actually.
And that actor, just a shout out to Paul, who's just so funny, and immediately got what I was going for.
He does louche very well.
Oh, I don't know that word.
Well, I think you've seen it on stage.
Okay.
Kind of. I don't. Oh, louche is now. Yeah. Now you've put me on the spot.
Oh, no,
how would I describe louche? Sort of sexually avaricious, sort of sexually sort of nonchalant, sort of don't give a damn, sort of. It's decadent, actually. It always comes back to decadence. Yeah, he's a person who he was representing the head of the church, and actually overtly says, can you talk to God? No, I can.
Yes.
It's sister.
Oh, I love that you remember that.
Yeah, it's a great show. I've seen it once, and I've carried a lot of it with me.
That is so nice. And I surprisingly really relate to the character of Savonarola, who Savonarola is a real figure who is known for leading, a very extremist religious movement at the time. He didn't work for the Pope or with the Pope in exactly the way that I show in the musical, but I simplify it a bit. And ultimately, though this isn't in the musical, though I think it needs to be, Savonarola led what was called the Bonfire of the Vanities, in which he wound up burning all of these paintings that now we no longer have. Botticelli was another like queer Renaissance artist who renounced all of his like supposedly like pagan art, so we don't know how much we've lost of his stuff. I think they burned musical instruments. Anyway, so he was this radical figure, and I was just thinking, how frustrating would it be if I witnessed, if I were Savonarola and I was so pious and I witnessed some of the hypocrisy and the actual bad faith among the church's religious leaders.
Corruption, in fact.
Exactly, the corruption.
Moral and otherwise.
I would be so frustrated, and that was my launching point for that character, who sort of becomes the villain, or I guess maybe is always the villain, but it really is from a sympathetic angle of, when we're all kind of, for lack of a better word, like brainwashed about, this is the way to be, this is the way to be. It can be really frustrating to, I'll just make it personal, see my parents sometimes skip church after telling me I need to do X, Y, Z. Like, oh, so you just make up the rules, I guess. And so
it becomes arbitrary, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that frustration is what kind of fuels a lot of the villain's arc, and that's what goes to show that at the end it actually is all about money and power, which the Pope and the Medicis have, and the others don't.
And it has been argued, whether I would join that argument, I'm not going to declare, but actually a lot of people see religion as a mechanism for control.
Oh, absolutely.
It'd be hard to argue against that. It's interesting that you were talking about burning of paintings. I was going to say it's like a proto-Inquisition, but of course actually the parallel is the burning of the decadent art by the Nazis. Mm-hmm. Having a decadent art, you're aware of this, they actually had an exhibition of the decadent art they were going to destroy, and it was one of the greatest attended art events in Nazi Germany in the 30s, and then they burnt it all. there are other more modern regimes which have done something similar. So, but it's rarely a sign of positivity.
No, not at all.
And it is also, faith carried to that degree. Faith can have worth, but faith carried to the blinkered faith or narrow faith is ultimately a corrupted faith in its own right too. But then we are once, perhaps. But your show has provoked these conversations. This is why I think it's so wonderful. I think it's so clever.
I found myself thinking about the people in my life who I really admire, and the character of Leonardo sort of just sees everything a little bit differently. And this is all lightly based on truth, but he's some kind of neurodivergent. Perhaps he's autistic, perhaps he has ADHD, and moreover, he just doesn't feel bound by one particular way of thinking, and
he's more of a free spirit.
He's more of a free
and Michelangelo
spirit.
is much more
more rigid, much more
reserved.
Yep, a rule follower, and Leonardo has a much more personal relationship with, he suggests at the very beginning when they're trying to figure out how to get God to, love them, Leonardo says, what if we just lived our lives fully every day and treated each other with kindness and respect? And
controversial.
And then Michelangelo interrupts him and says that's dumb, so, and then that's the whole launching point. And so Leonardo is where I'm projecting all of my thoughts about how to actually live a good life, and of course he's sort of right in the end. So
although he skirts for danger more.
That's correct.
So we've got this wonderful confection, which is so much more than a confection. It's like the whipped cream is everything if you want it to be, but underneath there's a really delicious cake. Once again, I want to talk about tone, though. You've mentioned the Pope on the phone, and some of our listeners will what? This is one of the other things I love about it. It is set in the 15th century, but everyone is living a 21st century life per se. People speak to each other on mobile phones, and at one level, that really brings home, I think, some of the points you're making. But this isn't so far. This isn't ancient history. This is history repeating. Insert name of oppressive regime here, and here can be anywhere. But also in storytelling terms, it's much better that they speak to each other on the telephone because it's immediate. Watching someone write a letter, you can get a song out of that. But do you want to have a song out of that? In fact, if this isn't about letters, and it isn't, then actually you just want to use all the trappings. I love the fact the Pope is vaping. You see him lying basically on a chaise lounge. He's not even sitting upright in a chair. That's another way of describing louche. It's that kind of
Sure.
So he could have a martini in hand. He's certainly vaping. He's it's very modern in its sensibilities, and once again, that and the language used, and I use the term language in all its, it's slangy. We've mentioned the memes, and the full-on sexual references, partly to shock, but partly to make a point. That's the point of a good shock, is there's something underneath it. If it's shock for if it's each point made, even if it's a punch on the nose, is a point to be made, and I like the fact that you've done that. And there's a song, it's quite early on, and I think once again it's a help set the tone a little bit. I mean, the tone's been very thoroughly set, but I think this is the one that really cements it. And it is the song where actually Leonardo and Michelangelo address the issue about being sexually active gay men in Renaissance Italy, whilst retaining their fundamental belief in God and wanting to be good Catholics and good people, and wanting God to love them. But it's done quite punchily, I think would be the best way of putting it. This is not a show that's afraid to use strong language in it when it needs to. Not excessively, and for no other... It doesn't do it just for the sake of it. But I think that song's also a fabulous song.
Oh, thank you.
Because it actually addresses a kind of thing I haven't seen very much of in theatre. I think the show does a lot of that, funny enough. It's as you quite rightly said, there's a lot of drama in the world. I include musical theatre in that, where a reconciliation is sort of found between the antagonists, particularly if a religion is mentioned. And this is actually much more about finding your place in the regime, but not being afraid to be angry, actually. I like that.
It can be an indictment. The song you're talking about was really fun to write, and it basically is about these two boys realizing that they're gay and talking about all the things that they want to do sexually. And I think what makes it, I'm actually not good with crude humor, believe it or not. I can't watch, South Park or, Family Guy.
When it's gratuitous.
Yeah, exactly. I really have, there's like an ick factor for me that I can't get past. So for me, the reason I guess I did it is because it still is very earnest, and they're not doing it in a gross way. They mean it just from the bottom of their hearts, and
possibly the hearts of their bottom.
Oh wow, that's great.
Sorry,
to write that down. They are singing it, not at all differently from how Ariel sings "Part of Your World" in Little Mermaid. It's like it's true. It's innocence. It's not objectifying anybody, and of course, when they're talking about butt stuff, that's what makes it funny. But it really is, it's sex positive, and it's valid, and I don't think we see that a lot.
No, we don't.
And it's tough because I don't really specify the ages of the boys throughout. It's a little bit something that I have to figure out eventually, but we all, regardless of what your sexual orientation is, had those moments early on when we realized these desires that we had, and kids are people too, and I'm
so I've been led to believe.
I'm getting a bit rambly, but it's just that there's nothing more real in the world than what those boys are singing about.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it would be foolish to deny the sexual imperative in humans. At the end of the day, if I want to sanitize that right up into into textbook language. But that is absolutely true. It's it's a primal force, and it's and so much drama is about that and or money.
Yep.
And even things which detective fiction. It's normally sex or money underneath. You name it, you do it. I think it's beautifully pitched all the way through, even though it's deciding to pitch itself more profoundly, and therefore I think more honestly than a lot of shows would allow themselves to do. There's a great honesty in this piece.
Oh, thank you.
But dressed in such a beautiful way. I keep coming back to that, but I think that's where I am. So can I ask to explore paths not taken in the development process? I should also
absolutely.
ask, when you mentioned COVID being the time you started writing songs, so I'm assuming this piece has been written post-COVID.
Yes.
But development is development. There's always going to be, I'm going to do this. Oh, it doesn't work.
Sure. The whole thing happened very fast. So I knew that I wanted to write a piece about the Renaissance after I went on that honeymoon, and was very moved by this story about Michelangelo and Leonardo. And then I started learning about, Botticelli and a couple other artists. And so I thought I was going to write something about, a group of queer Renaissance artists that didn't really have any relationships with each other. I tried that a couple times. And
almost like a tableau.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I found, when their relationships were kind of contrived in that way, all these different artists just in a room, it got boring quick. And I was like, Dylan, you're being shy as a writer because you haven't really done this before, and you just write a story. You're afraid to write an actual story.
But how wonderful that you've recognised that. Do you mind me saying?
Oh, no,
there are a million
you.
writers who have never recognised that and are the poorer for it.
Yeah. No, it's scary to actually put yourself out there and say, no, we're going to start, in a family home, and we're going to see them to their,
a fireside chat.
Yes. Yeah. And so I started writing an outline in January
this year.
Of this year.
That is incredibly accomplished.
Oh, thank you.
Goodness.
Well, so I was invited to to apply to a sort of writing retreat at Goodspeed Opera House in Connecticut. I still don't know how they found me or why they wanted me, so I'm incredibly grateful for that. And in preparation for this, I was like, well, I have to come in with at least an outline because I don't want to be the only writer there who didn't write anything. And this is my first real original musical. I wanted it to go well, and so I worked really hard on an outline. Showed up in mid-January. I think it was last week of January, first week of February. This 2-week retreat. I wrote like crazy. And one of the people there that they have sort of on staff to help you out and give you advice was a sort of producer in residence called Blair Russell. And towards the end of that 2-week writing like retreat, he sort of said half jokingly, if you finish this by March 3rd, I'll bring it to the Fringe. I said, haha, okay. And, wrote like crazy just because I was like, I have nothing to lose, and maybe he was serious. And so I went home, finished the, this 90-minute show, and sent it to him, and he said, yeah, sure, that's great. I'll bring it to the Fringe.
This is a dream.
No, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I'm so lucky. I then found out that it would have to be 60 minutes, so I had to cut a third of it. But honestly, some of those cuts I should keep.
Actually, sometimes it's a very good exercise.
It was a really good exercise. It was hard, and now I'm like, of course I do miss having a villain song and things like that, but that's okay.
We'll talk about future productions in a minute.
Yeah, and so then it was really just off to the races. He found a director and a whole production team. Blair Russell also brought a show called Diva Live from Hell to the Fringe this year.
With Luke Bayer?
Yes, with Luke Bayer. And so we share a lot of creative team with them. And yeah, so honestly, there haven't been that many like other routes to go on because it's been so fast. But the key thing was that original idea of doing a bunch of unrelated Renaissance artists in a room and realizing, no, let's give a narrative. Like, let's have a story. Yeah.
Well, I'm very glad that you did, and actually, you've hung a lot on that story. It does a lot of work. It's not just, and then they did this, and then they did that. Actually, once again, like a good drama, and this is a good drama, there's also something very touching, particularly towards the end, which I'm not going to spoil in any way, but actually I think it stayed with me, let me put it that way.
Oh, I'm so glad.
And that is a sign of a good piece. I mean, it boils straight down to, do you leave your memory of a show when you leave the auditorium, or do you take it home with you? I always think if you take it home with you, then that's a good show.
Oh, that's great.
And that's exactly what I've had with
Thank
this.
you.
Now, you said you had to cut it down to the Edinburgh slot, which is traditionally shorter than anyone would like it to be, but very understandable. And it normally includes in and out, get out times, which at a speed that no one can believe. 5 minutes in, 5 minutes out.
Yes.
And you've got big old columns. There's a lovely set, by the way.
I'm helping carry those columns. Yeah.
Do they have casters on their bottom or not?
The cast is doing it.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
No, casters, wheels on the bottom of the...
Oh, they do, yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes they malfunction, which is scary, but yeah.
Just like a shopping trolley. Yes, quite right. It's good to know that real life comes along and kicks everyone in the teeth eventually. So it was cut down. So its original length would be 90 minutes?
I think 90 minutes, yeah.
Yeah, and did you always see it as a one-act piece, or can you ever see a two-act piece? And you can probably see where I'm going with this conversation. This is a great show. I'm so delighted it premiered here at the Edinburgh Fringe, but I do think it should have legs elsewhere.
Oh, thank you.
Very shapely legs like David, while we're on them. But seriously, I do think this is a show that needs to go elsewhere. So what might have, if someone said to you, develop this further, would you do a two-act piece? Would you keep it at 90 minutes?
That's a great question.
And is there any kind of, what could happen and what might happen?
Yeah, I'm very, very open, because I think the story works as told by a cast of 5 actors and kind of just really quick comedy. I'm happy with that
it's
version.
Snappy, yeah.
Snappy, yeah.
But also, I'm going to make this point. A cast of 5, it makes it a very portable show.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
An easy, at one level, it's a very easy show to put on.
I think that's the reason that I picked it to write, because I was like, at the end of the day, I know no producer is going to be interested in this, so I might have to be the one to put it out there myself and fund it. Thankfully, that didn't happen, and someone was interested in it.
But you still thought a cast list that was smaller than Aida would probably go down a long way.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that he wouldn't have said yes otherwise. And so, but I
need the elephants.
Exactly. But I think one thing that could improve about the show in a longer version is this sort of epicness of it, because I do think Michelangelo's entire life story is so interesting, and
it was your original hook. You said so.
It was my original hook, yeah.
Interesting, though.
And how heartbreaking it is. He died with all this money that he never even spent, because it wasn't about that, and he he disfigured his back painting the Sistine Chapel, and there's all of these things that are really hard to convey in a breakneck speed comedy that I think could land in a longer version. But, you know, I would need a bigger cast. I need stuff expanded. So I'm very open. You know, if anyone's listening, it could be whatever you want. So, yeah.
Well, let me add my voice to this.
Sure.
This is a cracking show in Edinburgh. It's one of the best shows I've seen. I can tell you that. I've carried it home with me, which is always a sign of quality. It's beautifully crafted. It's got so many layers. Dylan, I think you're an absolutely marvellous writer. And I'm desperate to see more of your work in the future. So please do continue to come back to the Edinburgh Fringe or elsewhere in the United Kingdom. But how can people, therefore, contact you? Do you have a website? What are your socials? And you might want to spell your surname, if you don't mind me.
Yes. So on Instagram, I am at Dylan MarcAurele, which is spelled at symbol DYLANMARCAURELE. So, it's a long one.
Yeah.
And then my website is dylanmarcaurele.com, spelled the same way, DYLANMARCAURELE.com. You can cut that out if you
I'm not going to cut that out, and I can see a man who's done that a lot in his life, because you've got that lovely rhythm.
Oh, yeah, exactly, yeah. NM, yeah. So,
and you are happy for people to contact you with
very,
inquiries or anything at all?
Yeah, compliments, criticisms, absolutely.
Engagement, quite right.
Yeah.
Well, I do hope that this show gets to go further than the Edinburgh Fringe. It absolutely deserves to, and I do hope that you'll exercise your writing muscles again. I hope you become inspired by anything and everything, because I suspect you're a man who could turn your considerable talents to a rather excellent outcome.
Thank you.
Dylan, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Musical Talk. And there we are, a conversation with the wonderful, charming and creative Dylan MarcAurele. It was such a joy to meet him, and it was such a joy to see his show, Pop Off Michelangelo. And before that we heard the song Renaissance Man, or in honour of Dylan's own pronunciation, Renaissance Man. And that was a song that he wrote for Pop Off Michelangelo, and he was singing that alongside Rocky Patera. As you heard in that interview, Dylan is a man who's incredibly modest. But, in my view, he needn't be. That man has talent coming out of, well, let's say his fingertips, because that seems to be most likely. Charming, clever, insightful, and what a talent when it comes to writing musicals. Exactly my kind of person, and I hope yours too. So please do seriously think about going to see Pop Off Michelangelo, a new musical. It's on at a venue called Underbelly Boulevard, Soho. And if you want to know where that is, that's 6 Walker's Court, Soho, London, W1FOBT. Go along to the website for the venue, and that is underbellyboulevard.com. You can find all the details of how to book and details of where to find this theatre. That website again, and I'll spell it, underbellyboulevard.com. So that's underbellyboulevard.com. I'm not going to spell com for you. I'm not going to patronise you. And the show runs for 75 minutes. Prices start at a very reasonable £10. And it's on between the 17th of May, which at the time of broadcast of this episode is this coming Saturday, and it runs from the 17th of May to the 13th of July. And it may be an extra draw for you to know that Michael Maruli, who was a RuPaul's Drag Race UK finalist, is appearing in this show as the Pope. What could be more contemporary than that? But do check the website for the dates in which he's not appearing, as there are just a few when he won't be there. And don't forget to go along to Dylan's own website. That's Dylan MarcAurele. DYLANMARCAURELE. And his website is hisname.com. DylanMarcAurele.com. And we'll finish today with just a few of the quotations about this show from the press. The stage called it fresh, filthy and surprisingly uplifting, and the Scotsman got it absolutely right when it called it endlessly clever. Because that's the great thing about this show. It can be taken lightly, or you can really unravel the depths and levels that it's offering you. It's a 5-star show, and for Musical Talk, it was our pick of the Fringe 2024. Come and see it in London between the 17th of May and the 13th of July and make your own mind up. But I'm pretty certain you'll find a huge amount to enjoy and admire in this excellent piece of work. Well, it's not just Michelangelo who now needs to pop off. It's the end of the episode, and I think I shall follow suit. My thanks to Dylan for giving me his time in Edinburgh and his permission to play one of his wonderful songs in this show. And I hope, perhaps, to see you in the audience at Pop Off Michelangelo at the Underbelly Boulevard in London's Soho. And with that, I shall literally pop off. So, goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk, episode 884, edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2025, except for the song where the copyright remains with Dylan MarcAurele. And my thanks go to Dylan for allowing me to play his wonderful song in this episode. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your favourite podcasts. And follow us on all the usual social media networks.
The song you're talking about, I had a lot of fun writing. It was basically...
Who the hell?
It's fine.
It's one man sending me four
Also,
messages.
I love that phone.
It's so retro. I'm so sorry. I can only apologise.
No, it's